Boundaries, accountability, deadlines, doing exercises, and so forth. And I was like, crikey, this sounds more like a boardroom presentation than a funky workshop called Finding Your Creative Mojo. But I do stand by these as being really good sort of benchmarks for the creative process. So I'm just going to go through some of these here, and I'm going to talk quite loosely about them and how I sort of work them into my everyday practice, if you like. Using pictures from the selection that I've just shown you. If anyone's got any questions as we go through, then just I've only been speaking to people on Zoom for the last 2 years. So I was going to say, just send a message in the chat or unmute yourself and ask a question. But you are real live people that I can prod. So if you've got a question as we're going along, just by all means just ask it, or we'll save some time at the end. So my first point was really just exercise. And I think this is actually really important as a photographer. So I thought I'd show a picture of myself running in a half marathon in Snowdonia, which I did a really good time in a few years ago. But I think creativity and photography is just like exercise. You don't become a better runner by running once a month. You don't become stronger by going to the gym once every 6 weeks. And I think the same is true of photography. You don't become a better photographer or image maker or artist by just engaging with the act of making photographs once a month or once every 6 weeks. If you want to get stronger, if you want to get faster as a runner, you need to be running or going to the gym 3, 4, 5 times a week. And I think this is a really good place to, I think it's a really good attitude to have with your photography. And I find a lot of people I come across in the world of photography, especially at a sort of enthusiast level, often it is photography by appointment only, and often only once or twice a month maybe. So what I would try and encourage you to do is to take photographs as often as you possibly can, to just treat it as a sort of visual, as an exercise. And I've got a few ideas to just throw in your direction, put out there. And this is one that I weave into some of my workshops that I do. And it's just a piece of paper. These were taken on a mobile phone, just a simple smartphone. And what I encourage people to do in my workshop is just over a course of a week is just to have a piece of A4 paper by a window in a bedroom, somewhere like that. Just when you wake up, just use that piece of paper, use a mobile phone, use natural light, and just try and interpret the way that you feel through that piece of paper. So, you could maybe imagine how I might be feeling quite calm and tranquil in the image on the left, and I might have had a bit of a bad night on the image of the right. And these are crude examples that I've just done. But actually, it's a really good way of thinking about how photography, how you can use photography as a sort of way to communicate. And actually, it's quite an interesting exercise to do, a visual diary, if you like, just using a smartphone. And both these pictures, they took a minute to take, just holding up a piece of paper, natural light, processed on the phone in black and white. And I don't ever necessarily plan to do anything with these other than probably use them in a workshop or a talk like this to illustrate the point. But just as a visual exercise, it's a really interesting thing to do. Here's another one. I just decided to photograph the sky every day, just looking up. I turned that into a little Instagram 365 type project. I used the same compositional device on every single picture, i.e. I just looked up and took a picture, but it just became a good exercise in looking at the sky, and it was just something I engaged with every day. It got a bit tougher in the winter because the diet suddenly is like, oh crikey, it's 4 o'clock, I better get outside quick. Again, it's not amazing imagery. There's no, it's just a picture of the sky, but it gets you looking and feeling, and most importantly, gets you taking pictures. Whoops, I've gone the wrong way. And as mentioned, use a little object. You don't need to go to Snowdonia at the magic hour to to get interesting pictures, you can use an object like a potato. And this is my nice little segue into Potato Photographer of the Year, which I mentioned. I think I did a feature on this for Amateur Photographer magazine called 9 Ways to Light a Potato, which was a sort of it was a slightly tongue-in-cheek response to a picture by Kevin Abosh, an American, or I think an Irish-American photographer, who sold a picture not dissimilar to this for $1 million in 2016. So in lockdown, I started to photograph a potato in the same way that Kevin Abosh did. I didn't quite make $1 million, but I did think I could make it into a fun competition. And so I launched Potato Photographer of the Year. Got some great prizes from Fotospeed, from Fujifilm, got Martin Parr, Paul Hill, and a bunch of other kind of cool people to judge. And suddenly it was a thing. So if you want an excuse and you want an object and something to photograph, I think we've run it 2 years now. This is the winner of the first one by Ray Spence. This is the 2020 winner. And this is the 2022 winner by William Rube, a French artist who has literally just been crowned the world's, the Potato Photographer of the Year 2021. But the point is that even the humble potato, if you Google Potato Photographer of the Year, you'll see all the other amazing pictures. In fact, if you buy a copy of Amateur Photographer this week, you'll see a 4-page article on it, which has some of the winners. But you can just see that in a small, humble object like a potato, is a great way to weave that into your daily photographic exercise. And here's the very same article in Amateur Photographer. Okay, so exercise is my first tip, if you like. The second one is creating boundaries, and this is another exercise that I like to do, with myself and also on some of my workshops. And this particular one is just going for a walk, but setting yourself a parameter. And in this instance, I think I set a stopwatch I just use my mobile phone, set a timer to take a picture to go off every 4 minutes or whatever. It doesn't really matter what it is, but to go off at a specific time. And when it goes off, you just stop and you take a picture wherever you happen to be. So this was just a walk near where I live. I've just put them into a little sort of fast-moving thing. And you can see sometimes I stopped in quite nice places and sometimes I didn't. But the point was that I just reacted to wherever I happened to be, and I ended up at a slag heap next to, or that's not slag heap, but a pile of dung or something. But the point is that you are stopping and you're reacting and you're enforcing a boundary, and you're reacting to wherever you happen to be. And I think it's a really, really good exercise. I don't know if you've ever packed your camera bag and thought, I'm going to go out this afternoon and take some pictures. You kind of walk out the front door and you're like, what am I going to take a picture of? And this is actually quite a good way around that, because you can just play this game with yourself. And so this might not be from the top of Snowdon at the magic hour, but the point is that by doing this exercise, by creating these boundaries and learning to look, when I do end up at Snowdon at dawn, at the magic hour or whatever, I will be equipped with a different way of looking that I can feed into my photography. And I think also that you also find you end up taking more interesting pictures and developing your own voice. And also, I think you also to start discovering your own neighborhoods, your own areas in a new way. I just literally did this a couple of weeks ago, and I was just in Valley of Rocks in North Devon. I don't know if anyone's ever been there. And I wasn't really there on a photographic mission. I just happened to have my camera, the one that Dave's using, with me. But then I got back and I realized I just had a little project. And so this whole thing was just shot in, I don't know, maybe the space of an hour and a half. And I just was kind of channeling. I was interested in various aspects of way humans interact with the environment. And I just put it together. Again, I've put it into this. It's got a slightly haunting soundtrack. It's like 45 seconds long, so don't worry. But I've just put it together into a little slideshow. But the point is, it was just a whole project that was made in, I don't know, an hour and a half, maybe half an hour of processing it afterwards. But it feels quite complete to me, nonetheless. So I'll just let that run. I edited all this together just on a phone. It's nothing fancy. And just when you need a unicorn at the end of the path, it's amazing, isn't it? But anyway, so that's just another. It's another quick bound. Sometimes I have some projects, and I'll share some of them with you that kind of labor on for years. But you can resolve some things really, really quickly. Sorry. And then I thought I'd just share this for the ultimate boundary. This is my good friend Quentin Lake, who's a photographer, and his boundary was walking around the UK, taking pictures as he went. And this, I was very honoured that he invited me to come and share the last 6 kilometres with him. He did the other 11,000, and I just went and did the last 6 kilometres with him, and we ended up at St Paul's Cathedral. It was about almost exactly a year ago. He finished the trip. The perimeter lives as a website, and I really encourage you to look at it. It's a really fascinating project. This is just one screen grab from it. But in terms of boundaries, obviously Quentin's taken it a bit further than my half-hour walk out of my front door. But it's a really good project and definitely worth looking at. And funnily enough, one of the things, just as an aside, that Quentin talked to me about was the hardest bit being what I think he called it the doorstep mile. I think it's a Norwegian saying. I don't know if anyone's heard it. It's like the hardest mile of any journey, especially one of this magnitude, is actually the first one. And once you've kind of done that, the rest sort of just flows. If he had thought about at the beginning how difficult it was going to be to navigate around northern Scotland with a tent and a camera in the middle of December, he probably wouldn't have done it. But just starting and just going was just what he needed. So part of what I've been saying, is embracing and going out of your door and doing these exercises, this 5, setting your timer or whatever, and doing these exercises is good. But one thing I've noticed is it really helps you to stop and look and appreciate your everyday surroundings. Especially in the last sort of couple of years when we haven't been able to travel so widely. I think finding this appreciation in our everyday surroundings is quite good. So I threw in a little quote from Nietzsche about, which is essentially just teasing out, beauty and interest in the everyday mundane is a lot harder than capturing a shot at, Snowdon at dawn. I don't know why I'm picking on Snowdon here, but I actually love Snowdon. It's my favorite place in the world, but I kind of prefer to go there to nourish the soul and raise my spirits than actually take photographs. So I thought I'd just share a couple of pictures where I feel like I've kind of really tried to embrace that sense of the banal. This is, the underpass in near where I live in the southwest in Bath. It's just under the A46. But it's actually quite an engaging place to go and take pictures and explore photographically. And as a metaphor or whatever, I kind of the concrete skies and the delicacy of the movement in the flowers can can speak on lots of different levels. A humble car park can take on new. You'll probably recognise this, Jeff, from our old office. And I've put this one in just because I wanted to just show how you can reimagine some scenes. So look at the 3 palm trees on the left here. This is in no, it's not. It's in Costa Rica, and it's just a semi sort of industrial port town on a fairly unexciting day, certainly in terms of light. I think it was drizzling a little bit, but by just changing my angle, reimagining the scene, maybe changing a lens, those are the very same 3 palm trees. So it's not necessarily that one is better or worse than the other. This image definitely has more sort of aesthetic. It's a more aesthetically pleasing picture. It would probably look nicer on a wall than this picture. But in terms, this picture, also has, actually in terms of my personal vision, this is probably closer to the kind of picture that I might take. But I just thought it was interesting that those 3 palm trees on the left are the same 3 palm trees, and they were taken within 5 minutes of each other. So just, by learning to look and going out and doing these exercises, doing a little walk and so on, and forcing these boundaries, forcing you to look and forcing you to appreciate your local or more mundane environments, but really helps fuel the creative eye. That's another one. Again, of course, it's pretty banal, but I think also quite a pleasing image in some ways. The arrangement of the lines, the tones, colors, and textures. Someone once told me that it reminded them of a flamingo, and I've never quite got that out of my head since then. So it's kind of yellow or green flamingo on a yellow background. Just a furnace, palm tree. Just I mean, this is the side of a customs building, but just isolating and looking and focusing on the tones, textures, shapes, line, form, and so on. And then nothing more mundane really than the side of your bathroom loo, which ironically I took just days before Trump was banging on about the benefits of bleach. So weirdly, it's one of my most politically astute pictures that I've ever taken. I thought I'd just add a few notes about trying to communicate, using photography as a way to communicate ideas. And often if you've got something to say, you might have an opinion about, the environment or politics or so forth. Photography can be a really good way to communicate. So I thought I would just show these 2 pictures just to sort of illustrate that point. So these 2 pictures were taken more or less at exactly the same point, a bit like the palm trees. I just changed my angle. But this is a picture of a glacier in Alaska, and it's kind of, it's relatively pleasing. It's got some nice, it's a bit oversaturated on this TV screen, but it's generally quite a nice picture. This picture is a lot less glamorous. You're less likely to put this picture on your wall. But for me, this is a much more interesting picture. And all I've done is literally take a few steps back, and I think made a more engaging picture. And this reminds me to talk a little bit about Robert Adams, who I don't know if anyone's come across him. He's a photographer. He's one of the new topographics, which are a bunch of photographers in the 1970s. And Robert Adams I won't go on about it for long, but I think it's really interesting. He talks about an interesting landscape. He's talking specifically about landscape photography, but I think it applies to everything. And he says a good landscape picture needs to work or should work on 3 levels. One is geography, one is autobiography, and one is metaphor. And what he's saying geography, he's talking about the topography. So in terms of geography, this image is a picture of a glacier. By autobiography, he's talking about how you feel, how you react to that sense of place. And by metaphor, of course, he's talking about how that could take on an alternative meaning. So for me, and Adams suggests that any one of these 3 things individually, geography can be a little bit boring, maybe, if it's just taken in isolation. Autobiography and metaphor could kind of go down the realms of being a little bit pretentious and so forth. But when all 3 come together, you can start to make interesting pictures. So for me, this picture, while it might be quite superficially quite pretty, it sort of only really operates on that on the geography level. It's only just descriptive. It's a glacier on a misty day, and that's about it. It's quite pretty on a superficial level. But for me, this image I feel works by taking a step back, like taking an existential step, literally, or 10 steps backwards. I've included the passengers on this ship and the deck. And so in terms of geography, it's still, in terms of describing the image in terms of geography, okay, some passengers in front of a glacier on a ship. But in terms of autobiography, I find it quite bizarre. So my sense of place when I'm there is like kind of weird. I'm on the ship in the middle of a glacier, in the middle of a bay, looking at a glacier. It's just kind of really weird. So autobiographically, that's kind of an interesting angle for me to take. And then as a metaphor, I kind of see the picture divided into three thirds. So you've got the glacier in the top third, you've got a swathe of humans in the middle third, and then you've got this sort of reflection in the water on the puddle area in the lower third. So for me, as a metaphor, it could speak to humanity's relationship with nature and climate change and so forth. That the glacier is literally like a melting through the humans in the picture to the puddle on the bottom. So for me, in a way, this image works on all three levels in a way that this picture just doesn't. It's this might be the one that my mum wish I took more of, but this for me is a more interesting picture, and this leads into some of my bigger projects that just sort of rumble on. So that became that picture became part of a project called The Lost Frontier, which was obviously just a little play on The Last Frontier. And again, I was in Alaska in 2018 and 2019 quite a lot on some other business. And I was kind of, this is just a Google search of photos of Alaska. And, the imagery is very sort of, this sort of very exotic picture of Alaska and a wildlife. But when I was there, I was kind of finding my experience was much more sort of humdrum and sort of like this, and there was lots of things that I was seeing, and I kind of wanted to capture that Alaska. So I started making sort of pictures that spoke to that, spoke to my experience of how I found it. So this picture, for me, is a more interesting picture, I think, than a bear catching a salmon out of a waterfall, which were they're actually even relatively easy to photograph in Alaska. But in terms of making a commentary on humanity's relationship with nature, a wolf rug stuck to the wall with a $3,000 price tag just kind of hurts a little bit, and I think maybe might be more effective using photography to sort of raise environmental issues. Obviously, being very mindful of the fact that I happened to fly to Alaska and was on a cruise ship when I was taking it, but that's aside. And then just these nice sort of nice quiet observations. There's a strong religious presence in Alaska. There's a lot of contradictions in Alaska too. Against the background of epic beauty. So I'm just making sure how I'm doing for time. This is a little, I think deadlines are really important. This is a bit difficult to illustrate, but this is a project that I've got rumbling on. I think we were talking earlier about flash in the landscape, and so I use a lot of flash in this. This is from a bigger project. I'm hoping my deadline is meant to be around about Christmas, because I seem to have been going through the seasons. It's not a seasonal thing, but I figured I may as well follow this landscape. The working title for the project is A Sentient Land. So I'm interested in the idea of the landscape as a sort of a living, feeling entity. And so I've set about trying to photograph it in that way. I've used a lot of flash, which is quite uncharacteristic for landscape photographers to use on-camera flash. But you can see it just picks up the foliage in another way, So in terms of the deadline, I think it's quite good to enforce sort of deadlines. This one's rumbling on for a year. The Lost Frontier project kind of came to a false end because I couldn't get back to Alaska last year or this year. This one is going to be a year. The one in Valley of the Rocks was a 2-hour project, and this one, this next project I'm going to show you just took took a couple of days to put together, but it was also about taking risks and really not caring, and just being quite cavalier about what you do. It's very easy to fall into the trap of being a little bit too precious, and not everything has to end up on a gallery wall. So take risks, fight the fear of failure, and also I think being bored actually can be really helpful, which just leads me into this project, where I took this on a Sigma trip in 2016, and I never did anything with this picture of Tokyo. It's not quite as saturated as it looks in this picture. Anyway, one evening I was just testing how I could integrate an iPad Pro into my Photoshop workflow, and I wanted to see how I could use the pen and coloring in. So I started coloring in Tokyo because I had taken this picture on this trip from the top of the Sky Tower, and actually zooming in and pinching in. And then I found it quite therapeutic, and I realized why, a few years ago, those coloring in books were so sort of popular. I was like, I can see this is, and so like 3 days later or something, I realized I'd colored in the whole of Tokyo, and zooming in was really interesting. So I kind of zoomed right in, and I was coloring in everything from lift shafts and what have you. And I mean, you can see the bigger picture that it comes from. That's a really small section. So I was zooming in, and then I decided, actually, I really like the aesthetic. And I was zooming in so much, then I decided to really just go punch out the color. It's going to be grainy because they were zoomed in so much. So I just sort of I accentuated that grain by adding even more noise and a bit more saturation. And I just sort of set about coloring in Tokyo. And it's kind of an interesting set of pictures. But it's kind of like, it's not, a grainy picture like this, well, he's on a printing stand showing grainy pictures like this. But actually they print beautifully as A2s, but you just have to accept the and go with the thing, and go with the risk. In fact, I even made it into a zine, which is another. I come and have a look at it afterwards, but it actually works really quite well as a little printed zine. They were like 80p each to make or something, but you can buy them for £10. No, but very quickly, I just realised a whole project from just sitting around being bored and not really caring. This is the antithesis of anything that a lot of the things that we see here about high resolution and all this sort of stuff. It kind of goes against all that, but on a visceral level, I think it works in some ways. And it was quick, and I had a sort of disposable sort of attitude to it. So there's the zine. I don't need to show you that. This is, I also made it into a little. So, talk about milking one file. I got like 30 pictures, a zine, a little 15-second video out of one image. And here's another example along the similar lines. I moved house a couple of years ago and found a bunch of old pictures I'd taken of some birds, and they were just little 4x6 end prints. And again, I didn't know what to do with them, so I just rephotographed them and just put them together into this little slideshow with some sound recordings that I had made somewhere else. Sort of Hitchcockian type bird nightmare. I'll stop it there, and then just finally, this is a photograph. People sort of think, so it's not a photograph. It's taken with a camera, but so just just playfully added that one in. Finally, just to make time. It's really difficult to. I have to be really disciplined. I'm a freelancer, and most of the time I'm just stressing about making money and meeting deadlines and stuff like that. I always find when I actually say today or tomorrow, whatever, I'm specifically going to go out and take pictures, using any one of the devices that I've used if I'm stuck for an idea. I nearly always come back with something that I can feed into my wider body of work, or I can feed it into an article. So I really think it's really important to make sure that you do set aside time in your schedule if you're serious about developing and evolving as a photographer. Of course, we are on the Fotospeed stand, so it would be remiss of me not to say that realizing work in print form, whether it's a disposable little zine, a beautiful handmade book, or a fine art print, is a really nice way to go. I do genuinely, and I'm not paid to say this, but I do genuinely like to use this little Fotospeed paper. I use it to make these little, this is actually in my old house. I've yet to put this up in my new place, but I like to use these magnetic pin boards to formulate bodies of work. So I just print 4x6s. And in fact, I'm so cheap that I even print them so they're not even full. So they're not, they're kind of like half a 4x6. So it's quite light on the ink. But it's a really nice way to just think about bodies of work. Often I notice that that's quite a difference between enthusiast photographers and serious photographers. For want of a better way of expressing it, is thinking beyond the individual image and in thinking in terms of bodies of work. So try and think in bodies of work is where I would encourage people to go. And printing out these small prints, it just is a much better way for me. And I think lots of people that I've spoken to is a nice way to sort of edit and start thinking about your work. You have something sort of tangible in your hands. And then, finally, just the artist's pledge. If people aren't aware of that, it sort of happened at the beginning of COVID, and I believe it's just something that rumbles on. But selling prints online through websites, and the pledge is that for every £1,000 worth of art you sell, you then buy 250 from another artist. So for us photographers, it's a way of self-perpetuating, keeping the community live, supporting each other, and so forth. So, of course, I have some prints for sale on my website, which I pledge to buy into. I have some other workshops as well, mainly through the Royal Photographic Society, sometimes with Fotospeed, sometimes on a one-to-one basis. If anyone's got any questions, that is actually bang on 40 minutes, which is, I'm quite surprised. That's my Instagram, if anyone wants to follow me on there. If anyone's got any questions, now's the time.
It's kind of easy to become an impersonator as a photographer. Can I get some tips about developing an original style?
Yeah. For anyone that didn't hear, the question was about being an impersonator and evolving that into an individual style. It's a really good question, and it's something that I in other presentations I have a lot of slides on. I think I've heard photographers say before, if you've seen it through the viewfinder, if you've seen it before, don't bother taking it. I actually think completely the opposite. I think you should take it, and it becomes a platform from which you can then spring and evolve your work. You can read the sort of the lineage of photography in all photographers' work. Martin Parr didn't suddenly become the only person to use color. He was informed by, and Stephen Shaw and William Eggleston and some of the other great colorists might have informed his work. I mean, and there might have been some points where his work might feel like it was derivative. It probably wasn't in his case, but I have work, and I know I call it derivative. Lee Friedlander using a car window as a frame. I do that all the time, and it's basically a complete rip-off of him. But I'm hoping that one day I'll carry on doing it, and one day it'll become my own in one way, shape, or form. Thanks, Jeff. Any other questions?
I also have a working microphone now. Why is this one so much louder?
Sorry?
This microphone's so much louder than it, isn't it? I made some notes, and but yeah. So your sense of place so you refer to that. I think that's a very underused skill that a photographer has, that you've clearly kind of honed over the years, of being able to show somebody where you are at the same time as showing somebody what you know, that
Yeah.
environment. Is that something that came natural to you?
Well, I had the good fortune of studying photography at Derby in the late 80s, early 90s. So a lot of that came through with tutors like John Blakemore and Olivier Richon. It does come naturally because I think I mean I just want to see things my own way, and I don't want to be told that I need to photograph a landscape in this way, and I don't necessarily want to photograph it in the same way that other people have photographed it. So one of the things I do, I have a workshop called A Sense of Place. One of the first things I do is to kind of get people to put their cameras away, which seems a bit counterintuitive for a photography workshop, but is to be in location, to use your other senses, close your eyes, use your sense of smell, touch, and hearing, and then ask yourself, how does that resonate with you? And then set about translating that into photography. Sometimes that might mean using a slow shutter speed. Sometimes it might be multiple exposure. Sometimes it might be a straight picture. It might be all sorts of different things. But I think what I try and encourage people to do is, rather than rocking up somewhere and say, "There's some water, let's smooth it all out," because I know I got my neutral density filters. That might well be the creative solution to how you're feeling at the time, but it might not be. It's important that it's in your creative toolbox, but it's not necessarily important. What's important is that you react to the place that's true to your reaction, and you set about capturing that.
Gents,